The Tower of London had always been a fortress of stone and secrets, but in the spring of 1536, it was more than that, it was a stage set for terror. The air was damp, heavy, carrying the cries of prisoners long gone. Soldiers patrolled the corridors, but even these hardened men, who had witnessed torture and death without flinching, avoided each other's eyes. Something darker than usual weighed on the walls. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn, crowned Queen of England, walked steadily toward a scaffold built just for her. She was not an ordinary prisoner. She was the first anointed queen in English history to be put to death by the state. What most people do not realize is that this execution was not just about eliminating a queen who had lost favor. It was theater, designed to display Henry VIII's power, to humiliate Anne, and to serve as a chilling warning. And though Anne's life ended that day, the ripple of her death shaped the reign of her daughter Elizabeth and left a scar on the English conscience that has never truly healed. 17 days before the sword fell, the court was gathered at Greenwich Palace. Spring sunlight glinted off polished armor as knights thundered across the tilt-yard. The banners snapped in the breeze. Courtiers laughed, cheered, and whispered. Anne Boleyn, dazzling as ever, sat in the royal box. At one moment, she dropped a delicate handkerchief into the ring below, a centuries-old symbol of courtly favor. Dozens of noblewomen had done the same in tournaments before her. It was harmless tradition. But Henry VIII saw it differently. To him, the gesture was betrayal, a public humiliation. His face darkened, his lips tightened, and without a word he stood, leaving the tournament in fury. That single square of cloth fluttering to the ground became the spark that lit a carefully prepared fire. Within 24 hours, Anne, once the king's great passion, the woman for whom he had broken from Rome, was arrested. The charges were shocking: adultery, incest, and high treason. But in truth, her guilt or innocence no longer mattered. The king had already decided she would not leave the Tower alive. 8 days before Anne's arrest, Henry had signed a commission that gave his minister Thomas Cromwell sweeping authority. The words were chilling. Cromwell was not asked to investigate or to seek justice. He was ordered to bring to an end the Queen's case. This was not a trial waiting for evidence. This was a sentence waiting for performance. Anne walked into the Tower believing she might still explain herself, that she might be granted a hearing before her husband. Instead, she had already been condemned. Her enemies sharpened their pens and their knives before she even knew she was accused. The machinery of destruction had been set in motion, and she was powerless to stop it. The accusations brought against Anne were grotesque in their invention. Cromwell's case claimed she had shared her bed with 5 different men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. It was a charge designed not only to condemn her but to blacken her legacy forever, ensuring that her name would carry shame long after her body was gone. The Crown's case relied on the tortured words of Mark Smeaton, a court musician. After 24 hours on the rack, he confessed to what his interrogators demanded. The other men named, nobles with far more to lose, refused to confess, maintaining their innocence even as they faced execution. The timeline itself was laughable. On May 13, 1535, Anne was accused of adultery at Greenwich. Yet court records prove she was at Richmond Palace, miles away, attending official duties. The conspirators didn't even bother to hide their lies. They knew truth didn't matter. Even Anne's sworn enemy, Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, admitted the charges had no valid proof. When your enemy defends you, you know the case is rotten. But the lies were enough. The Kingswell had made them truth. And arrived at the Tower expecting chains and darkness. Instead, she was taken to the royal apartments she had once occupied as a queen-in-waiting. The very chambers where she had prepared for her coronation 3 years earlier. Imagine the cruelty, the same tapestries, the same carved ceilings, the same views from the windows. Rooms that had once promised glory now stood as a prison where she would await death. Sir William Kingston, the constable of the Tower, recorded her every word in letters to Cromwell. Assigned to her service were 4 ladies. But these women were not there to comfort her. They were spies. Even Lady Kingston, the constable's wife, betrayed her trust. Every sigh, every prayer, every cry of despair was carried back to her enemies. And was not simply locked away. She was trapped inside a theater of memory, where her past triumphs mocked her present ruin. The days in the Tower began to erode her spirit. Kingston noted her sudden laughter, sharp and unnatural, followed by uncontrollable weeping. It was not joy. It was the cracking of a soul under unbearable pressure. And paced her rooms, whispering that she would be accused with 3 men. She even offered her body for physical examination to disprove the incest charge. That is how desperate she had become. But the cruelest weapon was hope. Her execution date was set, then postponed. She spent long nights praying, preparing her soul, only to wake and find the scaffold still waiting. Each delay tightened the vice. By the final days, she was so weary that Kingston reported she longed for the end, believing death would be mercy. They had broken her before she ever touched the scaffold. Anne's trial was not a search for truth. It was a performance, carefully staged to give the appearance of law while guaranteeing a death sentence. 27 peers sat in judgment. Among them, her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, who would pronounce the verdict, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, who had mocked her openly, Henry Percy, her former love, forced to condemn her, and several relatives of Jane Seymour, the woman already chosen to replace her. And had no counsel. She did not even know the full charges until she stood in court. There were no witnesses to cross-examine, no physical evidence presented. The entire case rested on confessions wrung from torture and hearsay written on paper. When the moment came, Norfolk asked for the verdict. One by one, all 27 peers declared her guilty. Every single one. It was not judgment. It was theater. And the sentence was death. The traditional punishment for treason by a queen was burning. Henry, in what he called mercy, changed it to beheading. Yet his mercy came with cruelty. He summoned an executioner from France, famed for his sword. The wait for the specialist meant more days of terror for Anne. And the symbolism was deliberate. By bringing in a foreigner, Henry declared that Anne was beyond the reach of English law. Her end required hands from outside the realm. What looked like kindness was humiliation, a final insult added to the sentence. In the morning of May 19, 1536, the dawn of her execution was clear and cool. Anne dressed carefully, as though preparing for court. She wore a gown of grey damask, trimmed with fur, her hair tucked under a simple cap. Witnesses said she looked almost ethereal, pale but calm, as though she had already left the world behind. On the scaffold, she addressed the crowd. She called Henry a gentle and sovereign lord and asked the people to pray for him. Some hear submission in those words. Others hear sarcasm so sharp it cut deeper than any blade. Perhaps she was simply trying to protect her daughter. Then she turned to her ladies and said with a laugh, "I have a little neck." She placed her hands around her throat and laughed again. It was not gallows humor. It was the sound of a woman broken so thoroughly that she joked about her own beheading. The French swordsman stepped forward. As Anne looked away toward his assistant, the executioner swung once. The blade struck clean, severing her head in a single stroke. Those who stood close swore her lips continued moving, whispering prayers even after her head had fallen. Anne's body and head were wrapped in a white cloth by her weeping ladies. No coffin had been prepared. They placed her remains in an old arrow chest from the armory. The first Queen of England to be executed was buried in an unmarked grave at the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the Tower walls. No prayers, no ceremony, no tomb. A queen reduced to nothing, as if she had never existed. Anne's daughter Elizabeth was only 2 years old when her mother died. The shadow of that scaffold would follow her forever. At 8 years old, she saw her stepmother, Catherine Howard, meet the same fate at the same spot. Elizabeth declared, "I will never marry." She kept that vow for life. Though she could never speak publicly of her disgraced mother, she carried Anne privately in her heart. She wore a ring containing tiny portraits of herself and her mother hidden face to face. She kept Anne's prayer book, her jewelry, even displayed her falcon badge in secret. The trauma shaped her reign. Unlike her father and sister, who signed death warrants freely, Elizabeth hesitated each time. When Parliament demanded the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, she delayed for months, agonizing. Some call it political theater. Others see it as the mark of a daughter haunted by her mother's ghost. Anne's death shattered the illusion of justice in England. It proved that the law was nothing when the king willed otherwise. Evidence could be fabricated. Juries could be packed. Even the sanctity of marriage, believed to be blessed by God, could be torn apart by royal command. If a crowned queen could be destroyed so easily, what protection did anyone else have? 6 years later, the same machinery claimed Catherine Howard, Anne's young cousin. The charges were just as flimsy, the trial just as staged, the verdict just as certain. The process had become a well-oiled machine: arrest, imprisonment, biased jury, predetermined verdict, execution. The message was clear. In Henry's England, no one, no noble, no courtier, not even a queen, was safe. News of Anne's execution spread across Europe with disbelief. Even in an age of ruthless politics, the killing of a queen on such fabricated charges horrified foreign courts. Lancelot de Carl, secretary to the French ambassador, wrote a poem over 1,300 lines long about Anne's death, circulating widely within weeks. Henry, furious at the scandal, ordered his ambassadors to suppress it. But the damage was done. Foreign observers whispered that the King of England had become unstable, a tyrant who could not be trusted. Henry's reputation shifted from powerful monarch to dangerous despot. From the jousting tournament at Greenwich to the scaffold at Tower Green, only 17 days passed. 17 days to destroy a queen crowned with holy oil, a woman anointed before God. The speed was no accident. It was strategy. It prevented allies from mounting a defense. It prevented doubt from spreading. It silenced questions before they could be asked. 17 days was all it took to erase Anne Boleyn from the throne and bury her in an unmarked grave. Henry thought he had destroyed Anne Boleyn. In truth, he created something he feared most, a daughter who would outshine him. Elizabeth's reign lasted 45 years. She defeated the Spanish Armada. She transformed England into a maritime empire. She became the Virgin Queen, a legend who still commands awe centuries later. Henry, the king who killed her mother, was remembered as unstable, dangerous, and cruel. Elizabeth, the daughter he tried to delegitimize, became the monarch who defined an age. Anne's blood watered the roots of her daughter's greatness. Today, the Tower of London stands as a tourist site. Visitors wander the same rooms and walked, take photos on Tower Green where she died, and read her name on a glass memorial. But no glass monument can capture the horror of what happened. Anne's execution was more than the death of a queen. It was the death of justice. When trials are predetermined, when evidence is fabricated, when juries are chosen for obedience, the law is nothing but theater. That was the real horror of Anne Boleyn's fall, not just that an innocent woman died, but that an entire nation watched and did nothing. Every time we accept injustice because it spares us, every time we watch truth twisted by power and stay silent, we repeat the same sin. Anne's ghost does not haunt the tower. It haunts every courtroom where verdicts come before evidence. Her executioner was paid £23, about £8,000 today, for the stroke that severed a queen's head. But the true price was paid by English justice, by every soul who lived in fear of royal whim, and by a little girl named Elizabeth who grew up knowing her mother's fate. That price still echoes through history.